The fire in the hearth crackled and spat tiny embers into the air, the warmth spreading through the spacious living room of the ranch house. Outside, the night was a velvet black, stretching endlessly across the rolling hills, the moonlight casting silvery shadows over the grazing horses in the distance. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of polished wood, leather, and faint traces of tobacco. She sat in a high-backed velvet armchair, her fingers twisting the scarf around her neck, her pulse thrumming in rhythm with the quiet crackle of the flames. At 20, she was still young enough to feel the world as something both terrifying and irresistible. Her hazel eyes flicked toward the entrance as the heavy wooden door creaked open, the sound echoing softly across the room. He stepped in, boots tapping against the floor with a deliberate cadence that spoke of confidence, power, and control. His broad shoulders filled the doorway, and his dark eyes swept over her with a predatory intensity that made her stomach flutter. The firelight danced across his chiseled features, highlighting the lines of a face that had been carved with both experience and an unapologetic dominance. His presence was commanding, magnetic, and slightly dangerous, like a storm contained within a man's frame. The room seemed to shrink around her, the air thickening with tension, as if the space between them were charged, waiting for something to ignite it. He leaned slightly forward, his voice low and gravelly, each word dripping with a heat that made her shiver. "I want some sugar," he whispered, his eyes never leaving hers, "so I'm having you tonight." Her breath hitched, a nervous flutter rising in her chest. The words were both a threat and an invitation, a promise of something she wasn't sure she was ready to embrace, yet something she couldn't resist. The firelight reflected in his eyes, creating a smoldering intensity that seemed to pull at her very core. He closed the distance between them with measured steps, the sound of his boots on the polished floor echoing like a drumbeat, each one marking a rhythm she couldn't escape. Her mind raced, a chaotic mix of desire and apprehension. Saying no was simple in theory, but the reality of standing before him made the thought impossible. There was an undeniable force in the way he moved, the way he carried himself, a combination of wealth, strength, and raw magnetism that demanded attention. She felt the pull of it, a tug she couldn't fight even if she wanted to. He stopped just a few feet away, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the faint tang of tobacco and musk that clung to his clothes. Slowly, he extended a hand, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face with a touch that was gentler than she expected, yet no less commanding. His thumb traced her jawline, and she felt a shiver run down her spine, a mix of anticipation and fear. "Tonight," he murmured, his voice a velvet whisper, "it's just you and me." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy, wrapping around her like a silken rope. She wanted to look away, to retreat into the safety of her chair, but her body betrayed her, leaning slightly forward, drawn in by the gravity of him. Her pulse raced, her heartbeat echoing in her ears louder than the crackling fire. She could feel the tension coiling in her stomach, the heat rising in her cheeks, a mixture of fear and thrill that made every nerve in her body sing. He moved closer, and she could see the faint lines of muscles under his shirt, the broad expanse of his chest, the strength in his arms. His presence was overwhelming, intoxicating, like standing in the center of a storm where every gust of wind promised both danger and exhilaration. She wanted to resist, to tell him she wasn't ready, but the words caught in her throat, trapped by the intensity of his gaze. He leaned down, close enough that his lips were barely an inch from hers, and she could feel the warmth of his breath. His eyes searched hers, and in that silent exchange, she felt both exposed and desired, a raw vulnerability that made her heart ache. The firelight flickered across his face, highlighting the determination and hunger in his expression, a hunger that seemed to match her own hidden desire. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There were no rolling hills, no grazing horses, no polished floorboards, only the fire, the shadows, and the unspoken tension between them. She felt the pull of him, a magnetic force that drew her closer, even as every instinct screamed caution. Her hands trembled slightly, gripping the edges of her scarf, and he noticed, a small, almost imperceptible smile curling his lips. "Don't be afraid," he whispered, his voice a low rumble that made her shiver. "Just let go." She wanted to obey, to surrender to the heat and intensity of the moment, but fear still lingered, a small, stubborn flame at the edge of her excitement. Yet, even as fear whispered in her ear, a deeper part of her yearned for this, for the thrill of being wanted, of being caught in the orbit of someone so powerful and commanding. Her breath caught as he extended a hand, a silent question hanging in the space between them. Slowly, hesitantly, she placed her hand in his. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of warmth up her arm, through her chest, and straight to her heart. He held her hand firmly, guiding her to stand, and she rose, feeling the heat of his body brush against hers with every movement. The firelight danced across their shadows on the floor, mingling and merging as if they had become one under its glow. He stepped closer, closing the final space between them, and she could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, strong and sure, grounding her in a way that made her tremble. His eyes searched hers, reading every flicker of doubt, every pulse of desire. And then, without another word, he leaned in, capturing her lips in a kiss that was both gentle and demanding, a perfect balance of control and surrender. Her body responded instinctively, leaning into him, pressing closer, as the warmth between them ignited into something consuming. The world outside remained silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the mingling of their breaths, shallow and quick. She felt the tension in her body unravel, replaced by a heady mixture of excitement, fear, and longing. He pulled back just slightly, enough to look into her eyes, his hand still holding hers, thumb brushing the back of her knuckles. "Tonight," he murmured again, "we have all the time in the world." And in that moment, she knew she was exactly where she belonged, caught in the orbit of a man who was as dangerous as he was irresistible, a night full of fire, shadows, and desire stretching endlessly before them. The ranch, the fire, the night outside, all of it faded away, leaving only them, a storm of passion and tension that neither could resist and neither wanted to escape.